I'm going to let you watch me graft this mat for my knitting basket. I have it on some double pointed circulars, and I'm going to, right now it's inside out, and I'm going to take this side of every stitch, because if it was turned over, that would be on the right side, and I want to close it as much as possible. So I'm just going to come under and grab that part of the outside edge of every stitch. Now, because I turned every row and raised a needle, you're only going to see 12 stitches here, which is kind of a lot, but I'm not taking the one on the needle because it will be taken in my grafting. So now I've just taken the outside to pull very tightly. And then I'm going to flip it over because I graft from my right side. Snug it to gauge. Need both my tips. Okay. Nice tight pull. Cross the aisle. One goes out and is still working. Come to this side, out and still working. That's my setup for grafting. Oops, don't wrap around that tip. So now that I've got my setup, I've got that pulled nice and tightly, I'm going to start the normal grafting process. I'm going to tell you off the bat that I am a continental combo knitter, which means that I don't care how my stitches sit on my needle, that I just know how to grab it correctly. I don't think they use the term continental combo anymore. I think that I'm a picker instead of a thrower of my yarn, and I don't care how if they're twisted on the needles. I suppose I'm a twisted picker if I want a new name for it. Anyway, because of that, I'm sure there are much clearer, better views to learn how to graft with. This is more of showing you how to close a wedge and, just a little philosophy about it, I suppose. So each stitch is touched twice, whether it's a knit or a purl. First time you take the stitch in and leave it on. Second time you take the stitch in and take it off the needles. If you're on the knit side, then you're doing those two movements on the same needle. If you're purling, you're doing those two movements on opposite needles. Look how pretty that's starting to look, my little circle. I check my my grafting as I go. I don't want to have to pull too much. In fact, while I'm at it, do you see that I could very likely be unwinding this and making it weaker? So I take my needle, figure out where it's spin, and I spin it some more because it needs its strength. Don't lose its spin as you let it twirl around through your needles. This is the 12 wedge mat that you'll find in the vintage manuals. And also I copied it again in my book. So that's where it's from. I made it on my 54 cylinder, but I left 11 needles out. So it's almost a large flat web. I think I lifted a few needles just the first few rows. And took my wedge all the way to the last needle. I didn't do the last needle, but I took it all the way down and did the 12 wedge mat. The yarn is Brown Sheep Lamb's Pride worsted, which is a thick 1-ply yarn. It works with large hook needles on your machine, but only if your day is warm and your needles are oiled, you're oiled and warm, and even the color sometimes makes it stiffer. Do Do you make rhymes up when you're doing little projects? I say in, being the middle. In and off to bed, you're done working. Out, you're going to work. You're still working. So out to work, into bed. That's how I say it. If they're already out and working, they go into bed. New guy goes out to work. Working guy goes into bed. New guy out to work. That's the little game I play. Into bed, out to work. My rhyme is different for Pearl so that I don't confuse myself. In with the new, out with the old, on opposite needles. See how I spun my yarn on my needle, so now it's got a little bit of an over twist. So let's fix this, because really I don't want to fight with my yarn. So for stockinette, it's into bed and on the same needle out to work. Whereas in Pearl, the first needle is in with the new, and then you cross needles and out with the old. So it's always still in and out. It's just a different movement. Just being on the same needle or going across needles. The Kitchener stitch. Kitchen, such a pretty name for a stitch. I picture my ancestors sitting by the stove waiting for the milk to curdle as they get a little bit of mending done in the spare moment. But Horatio Herbert Kitchener, the namesake for this, is not my favorite person, so take a little trip down the Wikipedia rabbit hole and you'll find out all kinds of information. Basically, he, at the turn of the century, early 1900s, he was chief of staff for the Boer Wars in Africa, where he interned women and children in concentration camps. He had burned their homesteads and poisoned their wells, and 26,370, 81% of them were children, died of starvation. Hitler thought this was a great idea, so adopted the concentration camp idea. So I'm trying to find any record of this contest that he held, and there's nothing, but I do find that by 1914 he was a Secretary of State of War for Britain, and he organized the largest volunteer army that anyone had ever seen, 500,000 men, and he did have money to make uniforms for these people. So I'm thinking that might have been. By 1916, he went down with a ship and was the talk of the town. He was everyone's hero. We're naming our children after him. We're changing the name of Berlin, Ontario to Kitchener, Ontario. So that didn't happen till after he died. So I'm thinking it was during that time, but they might have just chosen to name it after him because they were naming their children after him. Everybody, it was just the talk of the town. So that's the history of the Kitchener stitch. But really, it's been made, I'm sure, forever. It's common sense, and mothers have probably sat and showed their children how to do it and throughout history. So very old stitch. The first time I saw it when I'm going through historical writings was for machine knitting, which actually made a lot of sense. You didn't have the person that you lived with showing you how to do it. You suddenly had this new thing, and it had to have instructions, and that's where that came from. So it's an old stitch, and I call it what it is, the grafting stitch or the mending stitch, and I don't give it a human name. I'm going to just continue on. This is actually, I could talk more about Kitchener, but I don't want to talk any more about him. Look him up and yeah, on Wikipedia. But I have 43 stitches on each needle, which gives me 86 stitches together, and each stitch has 2 movements. So this is 172 movements on this piece. I think I will just push forward, and this is where you tell yourself, fall in love with grafting. It's a nice rhythmic movement, and you've got to do it. It's part of this. If you want to work on a CSM, this is part of the process. So I would recommend that you learn how to enjoy it and sit back, and you can fast forward. Definitely speed this thing up, and I'll be silent and take you to the end. When I edit, I may even cut some of this out. It really is repetitive.
Unknown caller.
Not my call. Okay. Last few stitches. The last stitch goes out, in, last stitch goes out, in, ah. Last stitch out across the aisle, in, last stitch out. Exactly the shape of the stitch, and you follow it around, and it'll show you where to go. The next one would be an out. And there you go. So now we're going to secure those stitches. I always go diagonally across a bunch of purl stitches and then check to see that nothing's showing and pull them through. Wool goes nowhere. This isn't a slippery fabric. That's good enough. Ta-da! I hope you learned something. Thank you.